A group of tourists stops near a food stall. One monkey lands on a backpack. Two others start screaming and jumping on the opposite side of the path. A fourth one unzips the bag. That's not hunger. That's a coordinated operation with assigned roles. Capuchin monkeys, Sapaju species, run some of the most consistent theft operations recorded in wildlife research. In high-traffic areas like Rio de Janeiro's Tijuca National Park and several temple complexes across Southeast Asia, a single group can pull off up to 15 grabs in 1 hour during peak visitor times. Not individual opportunistic snatches, structured operations where different individuals handle distraction, approach, and extraction separately. The division of labor is consistent enough that researchers can observe it repeating across multiple visits to the same location. What makes it stranger is what they select. Capuchins don't just take food. They specifically go for sunglasses, wallets, bottle caps, and phones. Items they have no practical use for. Researchers started noticing that after a theft, the monkey would hold the object up and wait, and only release it once a human offered food in exchange. They reverse-engineered the concept of ransom without formal instruction, just observation and iteration. This works because their brains are built for it. Capuchins have one of the highest brain-to-body ratios of any primate. That's not a minor distinction. It translates directly into problem-solving capacity, memory, and social coordination that rival animals several times their size. A capuchin can keep track of which humans in an area have food, which have already been approached, and which bags are worth investigating, all at the same time. The hands are the other part. That grip, tight enough to open zipper pulls and go through side pockets, is backed by a prehensile tail strong enough to hold the entire body weight from a single branch. It works as a fifth limb, freeing both hands for whatever the job requires. The downside is that capuchins consistently overestimate which branches can handle their confidence. They lose the tip of the tail at a statistically notable rate. Excess confidence has a physical cost. Tool use adds another layer. Capuchins place a hard nut on a flat stone, then bring a heavier stone down with enough force and accuracy to crack the shell without destroying the contents. This isn't improvised. Different groups use different techniques, and younger capuchins learn by watching adults for extended periods before attempting it themselves. It's the kind of skill transfer that most people only associate with humans. Researchers spent years trying to categorize it differently before eventually calling it what it is. There's one lab experiment that keeps coming up in behavioral science. Two capuchins side by side, both doing the same simple task. One receives a grape as a reward. The other gets a cucumber slice. The cucumber one watches the grape get handed over. It doesn't just eat its slice in quiet disappointment. It throws the cucumber back at the researcher and refuses to continue the task entirely. That response has a name: inequity aversion. The recognition that a deal must be proportionally fair, or it isn't a deal worth taking. That's not a trick. That's a value system operating in a small primate that weighs about 4 kilograms. The thefts aren't always driven by what people assume. Capuchins in well-fed captive environments still steal. Juveniles and lower-ranking individuals steal most often when they're not particularly hungry. The stolen objects get abandoned within minutes. What changes after a successful theft is the thief's position inside the group. The social elevation is the point. Status theft runs on a different economy than food theft, but it follows the same internal logic just as precisely. One last detail. Before climbing or signaling group members, capuchins rub live ants, onion slices, or citrus rinds directly into their fur. The ants get pressed into the coat with methodical, deliberate strokes. The working theories involve chemical compounds acting as natural repellents or social signals. The exact function is still being studied. What's harder to study is what it looks like, a small primate carefully preparing itself before going to work. Raccoons, Proxion lotor, don't coordinate with anyone. They don't need to. In the 1980s, a researcher ran a lock and latch test series on raccoons. 13 different mechanisms: bolts, hooks, levers, combination fasteners. The raccoons opened 11 of them on the first attempt. The remaining 2 went down on the second try. The researcher noted the animals seemed more engaged as the puzzles got harder. That was 40 years ago. The raccoons living in North American cities today are several generations removed from those test subjects. In that time, cities have introduced more sophisticated containers, motion-activated deterrents, reinforced latches, and animal-proof enclosures designed specifically to stop them. The raccoon population has responded to every single iteration. Urban raccoons now score measurably higher on problem-solving benchmarks than their rural counterparts. Not because they're a different animal, but because the environment has been running an involuntary selection process for decades. The ones that couldn't adapt didn't pass on their approach. The reason behind the precision is in the paws. Raccoons have 4 to 5 times more sensory nerve endings in their front paws than most other mammals. The somatosensory cortex, the part of the brain that processes tactile input, is structured more like a primate's than like a dog's or a cat's. When a raccoon places its paw on an object in complete darkness, it isn't guessing. It's getting a detailed read in real time. Shape, texture, temperature, resistance, surface composition, all of it simultaneously through touch alone. The idea that raccoons wash their food for hygiene purposes is one of those things that got repeated long enough to become assumed fact. The Latin species name, lotor, meaning washer, helped that story along. What's actually happening is that wetting the paws enhances the sensitivity of those nerve endings, allowing for more precise tactile information before eating. The food isn't being cleaned. It's being read more carefully. The hygiene narrative was a human projection onto a sensory behavior. In cities with regular collection schedules, raccoons have been observed approaching trash containers with notable timing, arriving after bags are set out, but before the trucks arrive. This pattern has been documented consistently enough across multiple cities that it doesn't look accidental. Whether that qualifies as deliberate scheduling in the cognitive sense is still debated. The raccoons continue operating on the same schedule regardless. Their rear paws rotate 180 degrees. This is the feature that makes standard vertical barriers nearly useless against them. The design assumption behind most fencing is that an animal climbs up and faces the wrong direction at the top. A raccoon reaches the top, rotates its rear paws backward, and descends the other side head first, gripping all the way down. The fence was solving the wrong problem. They're resistant to a range of toxins that cause serious reactions in comparable mammals. The diet this enables is almost unreasonably broad. Invertebrates, small vertebrates, fruit, grain, human food waste, eggs, and plants that would cause significant digestive issues for most animals nearby. Combined with the tactile intelligence, the problem-solving capacity, and the physical adaptability, it means there's almost no urban environment a raccoon can't turn functional. They've been found on the roofs of hospitals, inside HVAC systems, in secured dumpsters that were explicitly redesigned to keep them out, and in apartment buildings several floors up, apparently because the elevator doors were slow to close. The dark patches around the eyes, by the way, reduce glare and improve contrast perception in variable light. The same principle behind the black grease athletes apply under their eyes during outdoor competition. The animal that most looks like a cartoon criminal is wearing the eye paint for a legitimate functional reason. That detail sits differently once you know the rest. The fork-tailed drongo, Decrurus adsimilis, has built something most animals haven't managed. It has built a reputation worth exploiting. Here's how it works. The drongo follows a group of meerkats across the savanna, or babblers, or starlings, depending on the location. When a real threat appears, a hawk overhead or a snake moving through the low grass, the drongo calls out a genuine alarm. The meerkats scatter. The threat passes. The meerkats return and resume foraging. The drongo goes back to watching. This happens consistently. Researchers tracking drongo behavior documented that roughly 75% of its alarm calls correspond to actual threats. The meerkats learn this over time. They stop visually verifying before reacting. The alarm has earned a track record, and checking every single time costs energy and attention they'd rather spend on food. Trust becomes the rational choice. The other 25% of the time, a meerkat finds something worth eating. A fat beetle, a scorpion, a gecko, and picks it up. The drongo calls the alarm. The meerkat drops the food and runs. The drongo lands, picks it up, and goes. That's the base structure. But the part that makes this worth examining closely is what happens when the system starts to fail. If the same meerkat group gets hit with too many false alarms in a short window, they begin hesitating. The trust erodes. The strategy loses its edge. Most animals would reach a dead end here. The drongo switches languages. It stops using its own alarm call and pulls out the alarm call of a completely different species, one the meerkat group hasn't built up resistance to. The panic response reactivates. The operation continues. Researchers documented this switch happening in real time within a single foraging session, with the drongo moving through multiple species calls until it found the one that still worked on that specific group, that specific day. The bird is running live adjustments on its own deception strategy based on immediate feedback. It has at least 51 documented species vocalizations available. The selection isn't random. It responds directly to the current awareness level and behavioral state of the target. When one frequency stops producing results, it finds another. The tail is a separate piece of this. The deeply forked shape creates real aerodynamic drag during straight-line flight. On paper, it's a structural disadvantage. In practice, it provides turning precision that's almost mechanical. When a meerkat drops a scorpion in the sand and the retrieval window is a fraction of a second, the drongo can redirect mid-dive faster than most birds can initiate the movement. The feature that costs it efficiency in a straight line is exactly what makes it effective in the moment the whole strategy depends on. Its eyes are a deep, saturated red. Small bird, forked tail, red eyes. It doesn't present as an apex anything. It looks like a minor background detail. That presentation gap between what it looks like and what it's actually running is probably not a coincidence. The behavior is sometimes described as the drongo cheating, as though the real alarms are the primary behavior and the false ones are a deviation. That framing gets the logic backwards. The drongo is a strict insectivore. It can only eat what it catches in the air or takes from something else. The false alarms aren't the exception. They're the entire point. The legitimate warnings are what keeps the infrastructure standing. Every real threat the drongo flags, every time a meerkat survives because of a genuine call, is the drongo making a deposit into an account it fully intends to draw from. The meerkats aren't simply victims here, either. 3 out of 4 alarms are real. They find more food, they lose fewer group members to actual threats, they live longer. The arrangement works. One side just has a slightly different understanding of the terms. The common cuckoo chick hatches before the other eggs in the nest. Its eyes haven't opened yet. It can't stand, can't fly, can barely move. What it can do, and does within hours of hatching, is locate every other object in the nest by touch and push it out. The hollow in its back is not an accident of development. It's a purpose-built feature. A shallow depression between the shoulder blades, present only in the first days of life. Specifically designed to cradle an egg or an unhatched chick against the skin, while the newborn shuffles backward to the rim of the nest and tips it over the edge. Then it does it again with whatever's left, until the nest belongs entirely to it. The foster parents watch this happen and keep bringing food anyway. The cuckoo's mother laid the egg days earlier, in a window of less than 10 seconds, while the nest's real owners were away. She found it by watching, sometimes for weeks, monitoring which pairs were building where, timing her approach to the exact gap in their attention. The egg she left behind is not a random insertion. It matches. The shell color, the speckle pattern, the relative size. The cuckoo egg mimics the host eggs closely enough that most birds cannot distinguish it from their own clutch. This is not a single adaptation. It's the result of an ongoing escalation that has been running for millions of years. Host species have been getting progressively better at detecting foreign eggs, rejecting anything that looks off, abandoning nests after suspicious additions, physically removing anomalies. In response, cuckoos have gotten progressively better at matching. Different female cuckoos have specialized in different host species. There are cuckoo lineages whose eggs are so precisely calibrated to one specific warbler or pipit that the forgery would fail completely in a different nest. The match is that targeted. Some hosts have reached a point where the cuckoo's margin for error is extremely thin. In those populations, the mimicry has to be near perfect to work at all. Researchers studying this back and forth describe it as a genuine evolutionary arms race. One side advancing detection, the other advancing deception, with neither side reaching a permanent resolution. The cuckoo that exists today is not the same cuckoo from 2,000 years ago. The hosts aren't either. The chick handles the feeding stage with its own mechanism. Alone in the nest, it needs to extract as much food from its foster parents as 2 or 3 legitimate chicks would. The call it produces is not a single hungry nestling sound. It's an acoustic composite, a signal that mimics the combined might of an entire brood demanding food simultaneously. The foster parents respond at the rate they would respond to a full nest. 1 chick. The food intake of 4. By the time it's large enough to leave, the cuckoo is often visibly bigger than both adults feeding it. In some species, the chick outweighs the foster parents by a factor of 3. They continue regardless. The signal overrides everything. What comes after barely gets mentioned. Every common cuckoo migrates thousands of kilometers to sub-Saharan Africa for winter, alone, without guidance, without having ever encountered its biological parents. No one taught it the route. No one demonstrated where to go. The navigation is internal, inherited, and complete. It arrives at the right destination on the right schedule, the first time, with zero prior experience. One minor addition: cuckoos eat hairy caterpillars, the ones covered in dense, toxic bristles that most birds actively avoid. The cuckoo processes them and periodically expels the accumulated spines as a compact pellet. It has access to a food source that almost nothing else competes for. Being willing to eat what everything else refuses turns out to be a meaningful advantage. The smaller male cuttlefish, order Sepida, has a problem. There's a female nearby and a larger, dominant male positioned between them. A direct confrontation is not a realistic option. So the smaller male does something that took researchers a moment to fully process, the first time they documented it clearly. He changes. The side of his body facing the rival male shifts to the soft, mottled pattern that females display. The skin texture changes. The posture adjusts. To the larger male passing nearby, there is no threat, no competitor, just another female in the area. Meanwhile, the side of his body facing the female of interest runs the full, active chromatic display of a male in peak condition. Both signals simultaneously on the same body, divided precisely down the vertical midline. The cuttlefish's skin contains millions of pigment cells, chromatophores, iridophores, leucophores, each individually controlled by direct neural signals. The display isn't a mood, it's a decision, executed across millions of cells in real time, with each half of the body running a completely separate program at once. Researchers call it bisectional camouflage. It is one of the most precisely controlled biological signals documented in any animal. The fact that makes this harder to accept. Cuttlefish are colorblind. Their photoreceptors detect only one wavelength of light. They see the world, for all practical purposes, in grayscale. The color matching they produce, accurate enough to fool predators, rivals, and researchers, is achieved without the ability to perceive color. The leading hypothesis involves using the unusual W-shaped pupil to extract color information through chromatic aberration, a method of reading color data through focus variation, rather than through dedicated color receptors. The hypothesis hasn't been fully confirmed. The alternative is that millions of years of selection pressure produced a color output that the animal producing it cannot actually evaluate. Both possibilities are uncomfortable in different ways. The hunting approach is a separate matter entirely. When a cuttlefish closes in on a crab, it doesn't simply rush. It sends a continuous rolling sequence of light pulses across its entire body, a stroboscopic wave, rhythmic and shifting, running from front to back in a repeating loop. The crab stops moving. It enters a kind of locked, unresponsive state that persists long enough for the tentacles to reach. This has been documented consistently enough to have an informal working name: hypnotic hunting. The neurological mechanism behind the prey response is still not fully mapped, but the outcome is reliable. The nervous system running all of this is distributed in a way that doesn't map onto most animals' architecture. More than half of the cuttlefish's neurons are located not in the central brain, but in the arms. Each arm has substantial autonomous processing capacity. The brain coordinates, but the arms think, to a degree that blurs the line between central command and local response. The question of where the cuttlefish's decision-making actually lives doesn't have a clean answer. 3 hearts keep the system running. 2 pump oxygenated fluid to the gills, 1 handles the rest of the body. The fluid itself is blue-green, copper-based, a different evolutionary solution to oxygen transport than the iron-based system in vertebrates. When a cuttlefish is injured, it bleeds teal. The internal cuttlebone, a gas-filled chambered structure that manages buoyancy, cannot withstand significant water pressure. The cuttlefish is structurally excluded from deep water. It is a shallow water animal by architectural constraint, operating in one of the most fished, most observed, most competed over environments in the ocean. Nearly everything about the cuttlefish is a workaround. For the absence of a hard external shell, for color blindness, for a body that can't access depth. Every constraint has a response. The responses tend to be more sophisticated than the limitation that required them. The blue jay is not blue. The pigment in a blue jay's feathers is a dull, brownish-gray melanin. Take a single feather and crush it, and the blue disappears entirely. What remains is gray-brown powder. The color people see is produced not by pigment, but by the microscopic structure of the feather itself. Tiny air-filled chambers that scatter incoming light in a way the human eye registers as blue. Remove the structure and the color is gone. It was never really there. It was a physics effect built into the keratin at the cellular level. The bird carries its own optical illusion in every feather. That turns out to be thematically consistent with everything else about it. At backyard feeders across North America, blue jays produce the alarm call of the red-shouldered hawk. A clean, sharp screech that every small bird in the area has learned means cover immediately. When a jay wants the feeder to itself, it makes the call. Sparrows and finches scatter. The jay lands and eats without competition. The call is precise enough to work against birds that have heard the real hawk and survived. That's not a rough approximation. It passes a live test. Producing that kind of vocal mimicry requires both a sophisticated voice apparatus and the cognitive ability to map and reproduce sounds that have no connection to any instinct or personal experience. The jay hears the hawk, stores the call, and deploys it as a tool in a completely unrelated context. That's a non-trivial sequence. And it doesn't limit the behavior to competition for food. Researchers have documented blue jays producing the hawk call in forested areas with no feeder nearby, no visible competitor, no clear immediate payoff. The surrounding birds scatter in all directions, and the jay continues moving through the trees without appearing to capitalize on anything. The current interpretation is that the behavior sometimes runs outside of any specific functional context. Whether that implies something about motivation is still open. It's a notable observation either way. Late summer brings a detail most people who don't specifically watch birds never encounter. Blue jays undergo a partial molt, and in some individuals, it goes further than expected. The head feathers come out before the replacements grow in. The exposed scalp is dark and rough. The body feathers are still intact. For several weeks, the bird looks like a miniature vulture from the neck up, wearing a jay's plumage from the shoulders down. It's temporary, harmless, and deeply strange to find it a feeder without context. The long-term ecological role is harder to see, but more consequential. Blue jays cache food for winter, standard corvid behavior, but at a scale that matters. A single jay can carry multiple acorns per trip, makes many trips per season, and operates across a wide geographic range. It remembers a substantial portion of its caches. The ones it forgets germinate. Over generations, this has made blue jays one of the primary drivers of oak forest regeneration and expansion across eastern North America. Thousands of square kilometers of forest exist in part because a jay buried something and didn't come back for it. Unintentional, continuous, and operating at a scale no individual bird could plan. One other behavior worth including. Before the summer molt, blue jays seek out ant colonies and actively rub individual ants through their feathers. The formic acid the ants produce acts as a natural treatment against feather mites and fungal growth. The jay is using a live insect as a chemical grooming tool, selecting for formic acid specifically, and timing the behavior to the period when the feathers are most vulnerable. It's not instinctive fumbling. The timing and method are both consistent. The beak is strong enough to split an acorn the way a metal nutcracker would. The voice is precise enough to pass as a different species under field conditions. The memory is good enough to relocate caches across seasons, and imperfect enough at the margins to reforest a continent. There's no single thing the blue jay is optimized for. It has taken a general-purpose set of tools and kept finding additional applications for each one, which turns out to be a more durable strategy than most specialists manage. Lion. The male is new to the pride. He arrived within the last few weeks after a sustained confrontation with the previous dominant male that ended with the older one driven off. The females are still present. So are the cubs, the previous male's offspring, anywhere from a few weeks to a few months old. Within days, those cubs are gone. This is not incidental. It is the first act of the new administration. A new dominant male in a lion pride, Panthera leo, systematically removes the offspring of his predecessor. Roughly 25% of all cub losses in studied populations are attributed to exactly this pattern. The logic is functional and cold. A nursing female will not come back into reproductive cycle while she is feeding young. By removing the previous litter, the new male accelerates his own reproductive timeline by months. His lineage takes over. The previous one does not continue. The lionesses are not passive through this. When an unfamiliar male is detected moving toward a pride with cubs, females frequently consolidate the young into a shared group and post rotating watch. They don't always succeed, but the behavior is consistent enough and coordinated enough to have a name in field research. It is one of the few documented examples of organized cooperative defense in lions that isn't about prey. The myth that follows lions everywhere is that the male is the dominant hunter, the operational center of the pride's food system. The data doesn't support it. Females account for 80 to 90% of active hunting across studied populations. The male's primary function in a hunting context is to arrive after the work is done and eat first. His actual contribution is structural: the mane, the size, and the willingness to confront rival males or other large predators attempting to take the carcass. He's not the hunter. He's the security infrastructure that makes it possible to keep what the females caught. The roar is part of that infrastructure. At its core, a lion's roar operates in frequencies below 20 Hz, infrasound below the threshold of human hearing, but well within the range that resonates physically in the chest and torso of other animals. Prey animals in the area of a roar have been observed freezing before any visual or behavioral threat is detectable. The sound produces a physiological response before the brain has finished processing the situation. The roar carries clearly at 8 kilometers. What it does to things closer than that is a different matter. The mane carries information the rest of the pride and rival males read continuously. Darker mane color correlates directly with higher testosterone levels and stronger overall physical condition. Two males encountering each other can assess relative fitness from a distance. And in a significant number of cases, the less impressive mane backs down before any physical engagement happens. The mane evolved, in part, as a tool for avoiding confrontations, not forcing them. The lion's heart is proportionally small for its body size. That makes it an effective sprinter over short distances and a poor performer over anything resembling a sustained chase. Lions close distance fast, commit quickly, and finish within seconds, or the hunt is over. The design that makes them effective in the first 100 meters is the same one that leaves them spent after 400. They sleep up to 20 hours a day. They are the only felids that are genuinely, structurally social. Every other cat species operates alone. The lion built something different, a system with division of labor, cooperative cub rearing, shared defense, and a political hierarchy that can shift violently and without warning. It just doesn't work the way the story said it did. Chimpanzee. In 1974, Jane Goodall's research team at Gombe Stream in Tanzania documented something that changed the direction of primatology and quietly unsettled a number of assumptions that had been treated as settled. A group of adult male chimpanzees, pan troglodytes, was observed moving in silence toward the territory of a neighboring community. No vocalizations, no typical social noise. They moved in a tight, deliberate formation, stopping periodically to listen, scanning before advancing. When they located an isolated male from the neighboring group, they surrounded him. The process that followed lasted several minutes. He did not survive it. This was not a single event. Over the following 4 years, the Gombe community located and eliminated every adult male in the neighboring group, one by one, until that community ceased to exist as an independent unit and its territory was absorbed. Researchers eventually named it the Gombe Chimpanzee War. It ran from 1974 to 1978. It involved coordinated border patrols, deliberate targeting of isolated individuals, and a territorial outcome that followed the logic of organized resource acquisition. The behavior was difficult to accept initially. The prevailing model before Goodall's long-term observations was significantly more peaceful than what the data eventually showed. There was pressure toward alternative explanations, disruption from provisioning, stress from human observation. The current consensus is that organized lethal raiding between chimpanzee communities is a natural and recurring strategy for territorial expansion, documented in populations with no meaningful human contact. It did not originate from anything humans introduced. The hunting side follows a similar structure. Groups of adult males pursue red colobus monkeys through the forest canopy in coordinated operations, using assigned positions to cut off escape routes. Drivers pushing the prey forward, blockers on the sides, catchers waiting ahead. Roles shift in real time depending on how the target moves. The hunts are not opportunistic. They are planned. Meat from a successful hunt moves through the group according to social hierarchy and coalition relationships. Who receives what reflects who is owed what. After a successful operation against a rival group, the returning males produce what researchers have documented as the triumph display. Extended, escalating vocalizations, chest beating, and branch drumming that carries for a considerable distance and can continue for several minutes. Whether it functions primarily as communication to the group, signal to remaining rivals, or something closer to an emotional release, is not something field research has fully resolved. Likely some portion of all three, depending on the context. Chimpanzee muscle fiber composition differs from humans in a specific way. The ratio of fast twitch to slow twitch fibers produces roughly 1.5 times the raw strength of an average human at equivalent body mass. A chimpanzee the size of an average adult man is not a comparable physical challenge to an average adult man. Combined with large canine teeth, displayed constantly in threat postures, capable of serious damage, the physical profile doesn't require weapons to be effective. The canines exist in part because chimpanzees lack the vocal apparatus for complex language. The larynx position and the limited range of the soft palate prevent the fine airflow control that human speech requires. What the anatomy couldn't develop in the voice, it kept in the jaw. Females leave their birth community at maturity and integrate into a new one. Males stay where they were born for life. The adult male hierarchy of a chimpanzee community is therefore a group of individuals who have known each other since infancy, built and broken alliances over decades, and will spend their entire adult lives in proximity to one another. The politics that emerge from that setup, shifting coalitions, long-term memory of who supported whom in which confrontation, targeted action against specific individuals over extended timelines, operate at a level of relational complexity that most animals don't approach. They live past 50 in some populations. They have the time to keep long records. A honey badger, Mellivora capensis, gets bitten by a black mamba. It finishes the snake, passes out from the venom, wakes up roughly 2 hours later, and goes back to the remains of the meal. This has been recorded on camera. It is not an exaggeration. The resistance isn't immunity in a strict sense. The honey badger is affected. It simply recovers from something that would be a permanent outcome for virtually any other mammal of similar size. The genetic basis has been identified. Specific mutations in the nicotinic acetylcholine receptors in the muscles prevent the neurotoxins from binding effectively. Mongooses and hedgehogs carry a comparable modification, each through a completely independent evolutionary path. 3 separate lineages, the same structural solution. In the honey badger's case, the resistance is reliable enough that snake hunting has become a standard part of its foraging routine, not an emergency fallback. A regular Tuesday. The skin handles the rest. The hide across the neck and back is approximately 6 millimeters thick and critically is loosely connected to the underlying muscle. When a predator grabs a honey badger by the back of the neck, the standard approach for ending a struggle with a small mammal, the skin moves independently of the body underneath it. The animal can rotate within its own hide, far enough to face whatever is holding it. At that point, the honey badger's response to being grabbed by a leopard is to redirect its attention to the leopard's face. Leopards have been documented releasing honey badgers shortly after this development. The pattern scales up. Honey badgers have been recorded displacing lions from a carcass, not by winning a direct confrontation, but by being persistently aggressive and entirely unresponsive to the usual deterrents. Swipes, vocalizations, posturing, direct pressure. None of it produces the retreat response the lion is used to triggering. At some point, the calculation shifts and the lion moves on. The honey badger eats. The logic appears to be that removing the honey badger costs more effort than simply locating food elsewhere. And the honey badger seems to understand where that threshold sits. Beehives are approached the same way, directly, without preparation. The front claws, nearly 4 centimeters long, open the hive. Several hundred stings arrive simultaneously. The honey badger eats the larvae and honey it came for and leaves. The thick skin reduces sting penetration significantly. A gland near the tail also produces a secretion that, when released into the hive, disrupts bee behavior in a way that reduces the coordinated defensive response. A dedicated chemical tool, specifically for beehive operations, developed through enough repeat exposure that the biology built a countermeasure for it. The brain is proportionally large relative to body size, a consistent marker of behavioral flexibility and problem-solving capacity. In captivity, honey badgers have been documented escaping enclosures by stacking debris to reach the top of walls, manipulating latches with sticks and returning to the same enclosure with a new approach each time the previous one was blocked. One documented case involved an animal successfully escaping the same exhibit multiple times through different methods over an extended period, each time after staff addressed the previous route. The animal appeared to be testing systematically. When genuinely threatened, rather than just annoyed, a gland near the tail releases a compound that makes a skunk's equivalent mechanism seem mild. Added to everything else, the skin, the claws, the venom tolerance, the commitment to escalation at any size differential, the animal has almost no natural context in which retreat is the rational first response. The slow, rolling side-to-side walk it uses as a baseline gait is not laziness. It is the movement pattern of an animal that has made an accurate assessment of its own position in the local hierarchy and found nothing in the immediate environment that requires it to move any faster. Before entering the water, a group of Adelie penguins, Pygoscelis adelia, stands at the edge of the ice. They want to get in. They also want to know if there's a leopard seal waiting below the surface. The solution they've developed for this particular problem is to select a member of the group and push it in first. If it comes back up, everyone jumps in. The behavior has a working name in field research: the penguin push. It's observed consistently enough to be considered standard in areas where leopard seal activity is suspected. The individual who gets pushed doesn't volunteer. The selection doesn't appear systematic. From observation, it tends to be whoever ends up closest to the edge during a moment of collective hesitation. Now to the stones. Adelie penguins nest on Antarctic gravel beaches because gravel is one of the only building materials available in an environment covered in ice. Nests are raised mounds that keep eggs slightly elevated and dry during melt. The quality and quantity of stones in a nest directly determines breeding success. Stones are, in the most functional sense, currency: scarce, necessary, and transferable. The theft is methodical. Males leave their nests, cross into neighboring territories, select stones from the edges of rival nests, and return. Research observations note the theft happens more often when the neighboring owner is distracted or absent, suggesting the behavior isn't impulsive. It involves a basic read of the situation before committing. The exchange is more layered. Female Adelie penguins have been observed approaching solitary unpaired males, engaging in brief courtship behavior, collecting the stones the male produces, and returning to a nest they share with a different partner. The transaction is consistently oriented around stone acquisition. This was first documented by George Murray Levick during Robert Falcon Scott's 1910 to 1913 Antarctic expedition. Levick's notes were considered unpublishable. A separate pamphlet was printed in a run of roughly 100 copies, distributed only to individuals deemed scientifically appropriate to receive the information. The full records weren't publicly available until 2012. The penguins had been operating the same way the entire time. On land, their eyesight is poor. The lens structure is optimized for underwater vision and works considerably less well above the surface. Underwater, they dive to 175 meters and navigate with a precision their movement on ice gives no indication of. At the end of breeding season, they return to the exact nesting site from the previous year. Not the general region, the specific location, tracked across hundreds of kilometers of featureless ice. The mechanism behind that navigation is still not fully understood. They arrive accurately regardless, The cleaner race, Labroides dimiditus, runs a medical practice on the reef. It has a fixed station where other fish arrive and queue for parasite removal. The race works through each client, entering the mouth, moving along the gills, cleaning the skin surface. The clients include fish that would eat something the size of a race without deliberation under any other circumstances. At the station, they don't. They hold still and wait their turn. The practice processes over 2,000 clients per day. Remove the race population from a reef section and parasite loads increase, fish counts drop, and multiple species begin leaving the area within weeks. The station is functional infrastructure. Here's what the race is actually doing some of the time. The parasites it's supposed to remove are low in calories. The mucus coating that protects the client's skin is calorie-dense and immediately accessible. When the race judges the situation, permits it, client relaxed, no observers nearby. It takes a bite of mucus instead of the parasite. The client flinches. Sometimes it tries to leave. Sometimes it turns to face the race with the posture of an animal, reconsidering the arrangement entirely. The race's response to a client it has just defrauded is to perform a tactile sequence along the client's body using its fins, pressing and stroking in a pattern that, in controlled research conditions, corresponds with a measurable reduction in the client's stress hormones. The race calms down the fish it just overcharged, keeps the appointment, and returns to legitimate work. Then, the cycle repeats. The fraud rate adjusts based on audience. When researchers introduced a mirror or an observer fish to the station, race cheating rates dropped measurably. When the audience disappeared, the rate returned to baseline. The race is running a different operation depending on whether it believes it's being watched. That is a specific kind of cognitive awareness that is unusual in a fish operating on a reef. In one study, cleaner race passed the mirror self-recognition test, the standard behavioral probe for self-awareness. The result and its interpretation are still being debated in the literature. What isn't debated is that a reef fish reacted to its own reflection in ways consistent with recognizing itself, which is more than most animals manage, regardless of size. The race's mouth is a narrow pincer built specifically for parasite extraction, useful for little else. It is structurally dependent on the clientele it is also defrauding. The two facts coexist without resolving each other. The massage is probably not coincidental. One more structural note. Cleaner race are protogynous hermaphrodites. The dominant individual in any group is male. All others are female. If the dominant male is removed, the most dominant female transitions, hormonally and physically, into the new male over the course of a few weeks. The social position opens, the body responds to fill it. The group continues without interruption. The female sea otter has just surfaced from a dive with a sea urchin and a crab. The male nearby has been watching. He moves toward her pup, the small, buoyant offspring floating nearby, and holds it below the surface. He keeps it there until the female gives him the food. Then he releases the pup and leaves. This is documented behavior, observed across multiple populations. Researchers call it resource coercion. It is not the behavior most people associate with sea otters. The images that circulate more widely are the ones of pairs floating on their backs in kelp, holding paws. That behavior is also real. The reason for it, though, isn't what the caption usually says. Sea otters hold paws while resting on the surface because the current will otherwise carry them apart. It's a drift anchor. The contact may carry social value as well, but the function is positional. Without it, they'd separate and potentially move into open water. The fur is the defining biological fact. Sea otters have no blubber, no subcutaneous fat layer for cold water insulation. Instead, they have the densest coat of any mammal, approximately 1 million hairs per square inch, woven tightly enough to trap a continuous layer of air against the skin. That air layer is the insulation. The fur requires constant maintenance, significant time each day spent grooming, because if the structure is compromised, the insulation collapses almost immediately. An otter that encounters an oil spill doesn't just get dirty. The fur loses its arrangement, the air layer fails, and hypothermia follows within hours. The fur isn't just warmth, it's the entire life support system. Each otter has a loose fold of skin under each forearm that functions as a pocket. Collected food goes in there during a dive. So does a flat rock chosen for size and surface. A specific rock used as an anvil to crack shells against the chest at the surface. Carried between dives, maintained and kept. Individual otters use the same stone over extended periods. It's a personal tool. The ecological role is disproportionate to the animal's size. Sea urchins consume kelp. Without population control, urchins can strip entire kelp forest sections down to bare rock. Sea otters eat urchins at a rate that keeps the forest structurally intact. Remove the otters, and the urchins increase, the kelp declines, and the dozens of species that depend on kelp forest architecture begin to disappear in sequence. The otter is a keystone species. Its presence maintains system stability that extends far beyond what the animal itself appears to be doing. The kidneys are large enough relative to body size to process seawater efficiently. Sea otters are among the few marine mammals capable of drinking salt water without accumulating harmful salt levels. The caloric demand from maintaining body temperature in cold water without blubber means they need to eat roughly 25% of their body weight every single day. A 30-kilogram otter needs 7 or 8 kilograms of food found underwater every single day, while also maintaining the fur that keeps it from going under for the last time. That's a demanding schedule for an animal that also keeps a favorite rock in its armpit. Bottlenose dolphins, Tursiops truncatus, have been filmed passing a pufferfish between group members in a slow, deliberate rotation. The pufferfish, when handled carefully rather than fully consumed, releases a neurotoxin in small amounts. The dolphins enter a visibly altered state. Slow movement, extended surface time, apparent fixation on their own reflections. The pufferfish gets passed along. The group shares it. What the dolphins are doing with the rest of their time is more structurally notable. Adult male bottlenose dolphins form coordinated alliances, pairs or trios that work together to pursue and herd individual females, moving in synchronized patterns that limit escape routes and maintain proximity. These are first-order alliances. At the next level, first-order alliances form second-order coalitions with other pairs and trios to compete against rival groups of comparable structure. And in some documented populations, second-order coalitions form temporary third-order alliances with groups they are otherwise in direct competition with. When a dominant rival requires a combined response, the alliance dissolves. The underlying competition resumes. The calculation is situational, applied accurately and temporary by design. Researchers use political science frameworks to describe it because the available biological vocabulary doesn't quite cover it. The acoustic element is specific. When a male alliance closes around a female, the group produces a series of low-frequency burst pulse sounds. Not echolocation, not communication in the standard sense, but sound deployed physically. The combined output from multiple males creates an acoustic pressure that registers as disorienting and physically uncomfortable to the female positioned in the middle of it. Combined with physical encirclement, movement options close from multiple directions simultaneously. The echolocation that operates alongside all of this is worth pausing on separately. Bottlenose dolphin biosonar returns information about internal structure, density, composition, the shape of features inside an object. In practical terms, a dolphin can determine whether a nearby female is pregnant, can detect the heart rate of animals in the area, and can identify individuals through internal anatomical features rather than surface appearance. They are, in a functional sense, looking through things. Each individual maintains a unique acoustic signature, a specific whistle pattern that functions as a stable identifier. Other dolphins recognize and use these signatures to refer to individuals who aren't present, producing the call in contexts where the identified individual isn't involved. The structural comparison to naming is close enough that researchers have been careful with language while describing behavior that is essentially what the word naming means. The expression associated with dolphins, the permanent upward curve of the mouth, is a fixed feature of the jaw structure. It is present during feeding, conflict, rest, and everything in between. It corresponds to no internal state. It means nothing about what the dolphin is experiencing. It is, in the most literal sense, a mask built into the face. The blowhole, for anyone who hasn't thought about it recently, is a nostril. Dolphin ancestors had nasal openings at the front of the face. Over roughly 50 million years, the opening migrated across the skull to the top of the head. The blowhole is where that process ended. The smile didn't migrate. It was never real to begin with. The magnificent frigate bird, Frigata magnificens, is a seabird that cannot land on the sea. Unlike virtually every other seabird on the planet, the frigate bird lacks the oil gland that waterproofs feathers. It also has no subcutaneous fat layer for thermal protection in cold water. If a frigate bird lands on the ocean's surface, its feathers absorb water, its body temperature drops, and it goes under. An animal classified as a seabird, whose entire life is spent above the ocean, that would not survive contact with it. The evolutionary response to this constraint was to stop trying to fish and start taking fish from those who can. The frigate bird operates from altitude, scanning the surface below, monitoring other seabirds in flight. When it identifies a target carrying food, the pursuit begins. With the largest wing surface to body weight ratio of any bird on Earth, it can accelerate, change direction, and sustain a chase at a level that most of its targets can't match. The target, a booby, a tern, a tropic bird, gets hit from above or behind. The frigate bird grabs it by the tail or wing and holds. The chase continues until the target drops or regurgitates the fish. The frigate bird catches it before it hits the water. It cannot retrieve food from the water. That part is not negotiable. The forked tail, which creates aerodynamic drag in straight-line flight, provides turning response speed that is nearly mechanical in tight pursuit sequences. The feature that costs efficiency in a straight line is exactly what closes the gap in the 2 or 3 seconds a chase typically resolves in. Frigate birds have been filmed picking up newly hatched sea turtle hatchlings from beaches, carrying them to altitude, and dropping them. There is no feeding behavior associated with the drop. The turtle is not consumed. The behavior has been documented across multiple sites and multiple individuals. Current hypotheses involve inexperienced juveniles or exploratory behavior. As of current literature, the full explanation remains open. The sleep record is specific. During extended foraging or migration, frigate birds remain airborne for weeks. Brain monitoring during flight has recorded unihemispheric slow-wave sleep. One hemisphere resting while the other stays active, averaging approximately 40 minutes per 24-hour period total. The bird maintains altitude and responds to air currents while sleeping. It just does it with half the brain at a time. During mating season, males inflate a large red gular sac on the throat, a membrane that expands to roughly the size of a human head, while female candidates fly overhead. It takes around 20 minutes to fully inflate. Outside of mating season, the sac is completely deflated and invisible. The bird that is visually dominated by a balloon-sized red throat for breeding season looks for the rest of the year like nothing of the sort. The fire is already burning at the edge of the savanna. A black kite, Milvus migrans, is circling a few hundred meters away on a thermal. It isn't retreating. It's waiting. When the wind shifts and a section of flame pulls back from a patch of unburned grassland, the kite descends toward the fire line, picks up a burning stick from the edge, using either the beak or the talons, depending on size, flies over the unburned grass and drops it. Then it repositions in front of the new fire. This behavior has been documented across at least 3 raptor species in northern Australia: the black kite, the whistling kite, and the brown falcon. It has been recorded and described in the oral traditions of multiple Aboriginal communities across the continent. For what those traditions indicate is tens of thousands of years. Western science formally acknowledged and published on it in 2017. The mechanic is straightforward. Fire forces small animals out of dense ground cover in a fast, disorganized scatter. Rodents, lizards, and insects that are nearly undetectable in thick grass become exposed and visible as they flee an advancing flame line. The bird that positioned itself ahead of the fire it just extended is waiting for exactly that. The prey runs out of the grass. The bird is already there. When working in groups, also documented, individuals spread along a fire front in positions that limit escape routes available to fleeing prey. The spacing is not accidental. It produces better per individual outcomes than solo foraging near a natural fire. The birds respond to smoke visible from considerable distances, moving toward it without prior knowledge of what started it. Smoke is a reliable signal that prey is being displaced from ground cover. The fire's origin is irrelevant. Natural fires, controlled burns, and fires they've started themselves all produce the same signal and the same response. Several Aboriginal communities historically used the bird's movement as a directional indicator for fire location. The birds arrived faster and more accurately than most ground-level detection methods. The debate the behavior generates in behavioral ecology focuses on intentionality. Whether the birds understand that the dropped branch causes the fire, or whether the behavior is learned association without causal modeling. That distinction is significant for classification purposes. What is not in dispute is the behavior itself. These birds carry burning material from one location to another, and the outcome, fire spreading to unburned ground, prey flushed, is consistent and repeatable. The question of how much understanding drives it remains open. The fire lines are documented fact. The archer fish, family Toxodidae, is hovering just below the surface, looking up. A beetle is on a leaf roughly 2 meters above the water. The fish compresses the specialized groove running along the roof of its mouth, a channel that functions as a barrel, seals it with the tongue, and fires. The stream that comes out is not a simple jet. The archerfish modulates mouth shape and pulse force during the shot so that the water at the back of the stream travels faster than the water at the front. By the time it's in the air, it's converging on itself. Everything arrives at the target nearly simultaneously, a concentrated impact rather than a distributed splash. The beetle falls. The fish is already positioned below where it will land. The physics of this were formally analyzed by researchers in 2014, using slow-motion imaging and fluid dynamic modeling. The fish had been running the calculation in real time, adjusting mid-shot for the entirety of its evolutionary history. The harder problem is the optics. Water refracts light. An insect above the surface is not visually located where it appears to be from below. The apparent position and the real position are different, with the angle varying depending on how far the fish is from directly below the target. The archerfish compensates. It fires at the calculated real position, not the apparent one. The correction is accurate enough that hit rates on stationary targets in experienced individuals approach 100%. This isn't present at birth. Juvenile archerfish aim poorly. The correction for light refraction is developed through practice, trial, failure, and observation of more experienced fish shooting. An archerfish raised in isolation from older individuals shoots worse than one raised alongside them. The calculation is learned, not installed. When a target is heavy enough that a single shot won't dislodge it, multiple archerfish in the same water fire at the same point in rapid sequence. The jets combine at the target. No visible coordination precedes the salvo. The timing is close enough to simultaneous that the impact registers as unified force. In aquarium settings, archerfish have targeted the eyes of handlers with consistent accuracy and shorted out fluorescent lights above their tanks by repeatedly hitting the same fixture. The lights don't fall into the water. Nothing changes. The fish continues anyway. The target is above the surface. The fish has one tool. The application is automatic. The red fox, Vulpes vulpes, is standing in a snowfield. Somewhere below the surface, roughly a meter down, a vole is moving through a tunnel in the pack. The fox has tracked the sound to a point. It waits. Then it jumps, arcs high, and drives its nose straight down into the snow like a dart. The jump almost always points northeast. Researchers studying fox winter hunting found that successful pounces were clustered dramatically in the northeast direction. Jumps in other compass directions succeeded at roughly 18%. Jumps to the northeast succeeded at roughly 73%. The current hypothesis is that the angle at which geomagnetic field lines intersect with the fox's sensory field creates a consistent reference that, when aligned northeast, calibrates the distance estimation between the fox's position and the sound source beneath the snow. The fox isn't choosing northeast consciously. It's following an internal alignment that, when correctly positioned, produces accurate results. No other predator has been documented using geomagnetic orientation for close-range targeting in this way. The event that made foxes notorious with farmers is the one where a fox enters a henhouse and leaves with one bird while the rest of the flock is found in the same condition but not removed. It reads like something beyond feeding, and in behavioral terms, it is. The pattern is called surplus taking. In open environments, a fox encountering a large or panicked prey concentration takes one, caches it, returns, takes another, caches it, and repeats. The behavior is storage-oriented. Excess prey distributed across separate cache sites for later retrieval. In an enclosed space, the same reflex activates on every moving target. but there's no escape behavior to terminate the trigger cycle. The fox works through the room. The storage intention was present from the beginning. The enclosure removed the part of the equation that normally ends the sequence. The anatomy is a study in convergent evolution. Red foxes are canids, related to wolves and domestic dogs, but their ecological niche push the body toward solutions that cats arrived at through a completely separate lineage. Vertical pupils for enhanced depth perception during low-light ambush hunting. Small tactile whiskers on the legs, used to assess confined spaces, structurally identical to a cat's vibrissae. A stalking and pounce hunting style instead of the pursuit approach most canids use. The fox and the domestic cat independently developed overlapping tools for overlapping problems. The tail makes up roughly a third of the animal's total length. In winter, the fox sleeps curled with the tail wrapped entirely around the face and muzzle. The fur dense enough to insulate the most thermally exposed parts of the head in sub-zero temperatures. It's not a decorative feature. It's a sleeping bag sewn into the animal's body at birth. The call the red fox produces at night, particularly the female's scream during mating season, carries for a long distance and registers to the human auditory system as disturbingly close to a person in acute distress. Sharp, sustained, and pitched in a register that activates something automatic in the human threat response. People unfamiliar with it have called emergency services. The fox is unaware of the resemblance or has given no indication that it is. It is also, for the record, the most widely distributed carnivore on Earth. Present across Europe, Asia, North Africa, North America, and introduced into Australia. It has adapted to Arctic tundra, urban centers, temperate forest, semi-arid scrubland, and suburban backyards on multiple continents. The magnetic compass, the stored food, the cat eyes, the tail coat, it brought all of it everywhere and made it work every time. A young Polyergus queen locates an established Formica colony. She enters. She finds the resident queen and removes her. Then she does something that sits in an unusual category, even for insect behavior. She stays with the body, absorbing the chemical signature of the queen she just eliminated, coating herself in the pheromone profile of the colony's founding mother. By the time the workers investigate the disturbance, the chemical information they receive reads as their own queen. The colony continues. It just has a different one now. One that smells exactly like the last. The colony will never register the change. They raise her offspring. Those offspring, the Polyergus workers, grow up with one functional purpose. The raid deploys as follows. On a hot summer afternoon, the Polyergus workers leave the nest in a single column, not a scattered foraging line. A column, narrow, fast, and direct, moving toward a pre-identified Formica nest. Scouts have already located the target. The route is established. The column moves without deviation and without noise. On arrival, the Polyergus workers release what researchers call propaganda pheromones, chemical compounds that don't signal attack or defense, but instead generate confusion and internal conflict inside the invaded colony. The Formica workers, rather than mounting a coordinated defense, begin reacting to each other as threats. The colony's defense mechanism turns inward. In the disorder, Polyergus workers move through the nest, locate the pupae, developing ants still sealed in cocoons, and carry them out. Those pupae complete their development inside the Polyergus colony. When they emerge, They are formica ants, surrounded by what their chemical environment tells them is family. They clean, they forage. They feed the polyergus larvae, they maintain the colony. They have no reference point suggesting anything is different. The nest they were brought to is the only one they've ever known. The polyergus workers, meanwhile, do almost nothing else. Their mandibles are shaped like sickles, narrow, sharply curved, built for penetrating the exoskeleton of a defending ant during a raid. Excellent for that. Useless for digging, construction, processing food, or self-feeding. The shape that makes them effective as raiders makes ordinary colony maintenance physically impossible. The clearest demonstration of this: polyergus workers placed near a food source in controlled conditions without any enslaved formica present do not eat. Not because food isn't available, because the behavior of self-feeding, never practiced, apparently never retained across generations, is no longer something the colony can do. The lineage evolved past the ability to sustain itself and replaced the entire capability with raiding. A civilization that cannot feed itself without taking what others built. The occupied population is not entirely passive. In some documented colonies, formica workers have been observed selectively targeting polyergus pupae while leaving formica pupae undisturbed, attending the brood pile, making distinctions between the two types in the same space, acting on those distinctions quietly and consistently over time. The full scope of this is still being mapped. What has been established is that it occurs, it's directional, and it specifically addresses the next generation of the raiding caste. The raids happen in summer. The column moves straight. The propaganda begins working before the polyergus workers reach the nest entrance. The whole operation, departure to return with pupae, typically resolves in under 2 hours. The name is a description. Ophiophagus, in Latin, means snake eater. The king cobra, Ophiophagus hanna, does not eat rodents, frogs, or birds in the way most snakes do. Its diet is almost entirely composed of other snakes. It tracks them actively, following scent trails across significant distances through dense forest, and consumes them whole, including species considerably longer than itself, including pythons and including other highly venomous snakes that carry compounds immediately dangerous to almost anything else that encountered them. The king cobra is not immune to snake venom. It has a partial tolerance, and it manages the remainder through speed, subduing prey fast enough that minimal venom enters the encounter. The venom it produces is neurotoxic, targeting the nervous system and progressively shutting down respiratory and cardiac function. A full defensive strike, not a feeding bite, delivers enough venom to take down an adult Asian elephant, weighing approximately 3 tons. The same volume, adjusted for human dosage, covers somewhere around 20 people. These numbers come from documented strike volumes and established toxicity levels. They are not projections from trace amounts. What separates the king cobra from most venomous snakes is that the delivery isn't fixed. Research on its bite behavior indicates it modulates the amount injected based on an assessed read of the target, size, resistance, the nature of the threat. A small prey animal receives a different dose than a large defensive situation. The cobra is making a calibrated decision at the moment of the strike. Most venomous snakes deliver a reflexive amount determined by the mechanics of the bite itself. The king cobra is deciding. It can raise the front third of its body off the ground and hold that position upright, reaching a height of approximately 1.5 meters. At that elevation, facing an adult human standing fully upright, the king cobra is looking directly ahead, eye level, horizontal gaze, holding still. The sound it makes during this display is not a hiss. It is a growl. A low, continuous, resonant sound generated by airflow through modified tracheal sacs, in a frequency range that lands differently in the body than the sharpness of a hiss does. It is audible before the snake is visible. The king cobra is the only snake in the world that builds a nest. Not a depression scraped into the ground, not a sheltered hollow under existing material, a constructed structure. The female uses her body to gather and arrange dead leaves and vegetation into a layered mound with a specific internal configuration. A lower chamber for the eggs, an upper chamber where she rests throughout incubation. The decomposition of the organic material in the mound generates heat that supplements environmental temperature during development. She stays. She guards it. In an order of approximately 4,000 known snake species, this behavior exists in exactly one. It is the only member of its own genus, distinct enough from every other cobra species in size, diet, venom system, and behavior, that grouping it with the Naja genus was not accurate enough to hold. The taxonomic solution was a separate genus containing only this species. It reaches 5.5 meters in length. It detects movement at 100 meters. It prefers to avoid contact with humans and will leave an area rather than hold ground if the space allows it. Most recorded strikes on people happen because someone stepped on one without seeing it first. It can lift its head to eye level with a standing adult human, hold that position without moving, and look directly ahead. And it growls.